He said it like it cost him nothing. That was the problem. Rayan was leaning against the break room doorframe, coffee in hand, watching Nora wipe down the counter that nobody else ever wiped. She had already restocked the sugar packets, fixed the lid on the creamer jug that had been sitting crooked for 2 weeks, and was now rinsing someone else's mug without being asked. It was 7:50 in the morning. Most people had not even sat down yet. He watched her for a moment, then he smiled. "You know," he said, "you'd make a great wife." He was grinning when he said it, the kind of grin that expects a laugh back. Nora set the mug down slowly. She turned and looked at him, not with anger, not with embarrassment, with something quieter than both of those things and somehow heavier. She looked at him the way you look at someone who has just proven something you already knew. Then she said one sentence, 8 words, and walked out of the break room. Rayan stood there holding his coffee, still smiling for a second because his face had not yet received the message from his brain. Then the smile faded. He replayed what she said. He turned it over once. Then he went back to his desk and tried to forget about it. He did not forget about it. Rayan was 28 years old and worked in a mid-sized marketing firm in the city. He had been there for 3 years, long enough to know everyone's name and short enough that he still wanted people to think well of him. He was the kind of man people liked without knowing very much about, friendly, easy to be around. Quick with a joke. He was not a bad person, that was the thing. He knew he was not a bad person, and that knowledge had always been enough. He held doors. He remembered birthdays. He split bills evenly and did not make a big thing of it. His mother had raised him with the word kind circling the room like a bird that never landed on anything specific. He had a girlfriend named Claire. They had been together for 2 years and 4 months, which he knew the way you know how many days are left on a parking meter. He lived in a 1-bedroom apartment that had exactly 1 plant, which Claire had bought and Claire watered because Rayan kept forgetting. The plant was doing fine. Rayan thought this was a good sign about something, though he could never say what. He liked his life. He would have told you that. At work, he sat 2 rows away from Nora. He had known her for 14 months, which was how long she had worked at the firm. She was 26, quiet in the way that was often mistaken for shyness, though it was not shyness at all. She was a project coordinator, precise and reliable in a way that made everyone around her slightly better at their jobs without them realizing it was her doing that. She was the person who sent the reminder email before a deadline, not because it was her job, but because she knew someone would miss it. She was the person who kept a spare phone charger at her desk and never said no when someone asked. She brought her lunch every day in a blue container and ate it at her desk while reading, and she never once complained about anything Rayan could remember. He had noticed all of this, without ever once asking himself why he noticed it. The morning he made the joke, the rest of the day passed normally. He sat in a meeting about a campaign that was running 2 weeks behind. He ate a sandwich at his desk. He had a 15-minute phone call with Claire in which they discussed whether to get Thai food or cook at home, and ended up deciding on Thai food, and that was most of the conversation. At 5:30, he packed up his bag and rode the elevator down with a colleague named Pete, who talked about a football match the whole way down. Rayan nodded and laughed in the right places. He walked to his car. He drove home. He made it all the way through dinner before he heard it again. 8 words. He was sitting on the couch with a container of leftover pad thai balanced on his knee when it came back. Just arrived, no invitation. He set the container on the coffee table and leaned back and stared at the ceiling. The sentence was not mean. That was the strange part. It was not a lecture or a cutting remark or the kind of thing that leaves a bruise because it wanted to. It was calm, factual, the kind of sentence that does not need to shout because it has already been true for a very long time. He thought about the way she looked at him before she said it, not angry, not even surprised, just already knowing. Like she had been waiting for someone to hand her exactly that sentence to answer, and today was finally the day. He did not sleep well. By Thursday, he had told himself 3 times that it did not matter. By Friday, he halfway believed it. That weekend, he and Claire went to dinner with her friend Laura and Laura's husband, a quiet man named George who spent most of the evening cutting his food into small pieces and nodding slowly at things other people said. The restaurant was warm. The bread was good. Claire laughed at something Laura said and reached over and squeezed Rayan's arm, and he smiled, and everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. On the way home, Claire asked if he was okay. He said yes. She said he seemed somewhere else tonight. He said he was just tired. She accepted this the way she accepted most things he said, without pushing, and they drove the rest of the way in a comfortable silence that should have felt like peace but felt, that night, like two people sitting in a room where a window had been left open. He was not sure which one of them had left it open. Back at the firm on Monday, he did not go to the break room at 7:50. He made coffee at his desk with the small machine by the window and drank it standing, looking out at the street below. He was not avoiding Nora. He told himself that clearly. He watched a delivery man carrying too many boxes at once, stacking them so high he could barely see over them, walking in a wide zigzag toward a building entrance. For some reason, Rayan watched him all the way to the door. He sat down, opened his email, read the same first line 4 times. At 9:15, Nora walked past his row toward the printer with a stack of documents and did not look in his direction. She was wearing a gray jacket he had not seen before. She walked the way she always did, like she was going somewhere that mattered. He watched the printer across the room eat her pages one by one. He thought, she is a whole person going somewhere that matters, and I made a joke out of her. The thought arrived simply, without ceremony, and then sat there. He turned back to his screen. But it had already arrived, and things that have arrived do not tend to leave just because you turn away from them. By the end of that week, Rayan had started paying attention to things he had not paid attention to before, not in a dramatic way. There was no sudden change, no morning where he woke up different. It was smaller than that, quieter. He noticed, for instance, that Claire always waited until he chose the restaurant before saying what she actually wanted. He had always read this as being easygoing. He was starting to wonder if it was something else. He noticed that his mother, when he called her on Sunday evenings, always began by asking if he had eaten, if he had slept, if he was warm enough, and never once led with anything about herself. He had always read this as motherly love. He was starting to wonder if love was the only word for it. He noticed that in 4 years of working at the firm, no one had ever once asked Nora what she wanted for lunch. She always knew what everyone else wanted. Nobody had ever turned the question around. These were small things, not revelations. Just small, quiet facts that had always been sitting there waiting to be looked at. He looked at them. He did not know yet what to do with what he saw. But something had shifted inside him, in the way that things shift when a sentence finds the exact right place to land. He had made a joke that cost him nothing. And it had cost him everything he thought he understood. The week after that, he went back to the break room at 7:50. He was not sure why. He told himself he was out of coffee pods. He was not out of coffee pods. He walked in and Nora was there, rinsing a mug, and he stood in the doorway the same way he had stood the morning this all started. But this time he did not smile like something was funny. He said, "Can I ask you something?" She set the mug down, turned, looked at him with the same calm, measuring look she had given him before. "Okay," she said. He took a breath. "What did you mean," he said, "by what you said last week?" She did not answer immediately. She picked up a dish towel, dried her hands slowly, and then she looked at him not unkindly and said, "Which part confused you?" And for the first time in a long time, Rayan did not have an easy answer. He stood in the doorway of the break room at 7:50 in the morning with no coffee in his hand and no grin on his face, and he said honestly, "All of it." Nora looked at him for a long moment, then she pulled out a chair. "Sit down," she said. He sat down. And that was where it actually began. Rayan had always been the kind of man who filled silences. Not because he was nervous, but because silence had always seemed like something to fix, a gap between two people that needed closing. So he filled gaps with jokes, with observations, with questions that were not really questions but just sounds that kept things moving. Nora did not fill silences, she let them breathe. She sat across from him at the small break room table with her hands flat on the surface, and she waited, with no visible impatience, for him to figure out what he actually wanted to say. He had asked the question, now he had to mean it. "The thing you said," he started, then stopped, tried again. "You said," he paused, looked at the table. "You said I had called you a great wife, not a great woman, and that I didn't notice the difference." Nora nodded slowly. "That's what I said. I didn't mean it as an insult. I know. I thought it was, I don't know, a compliment." "I know that too," she said. "That's the part that made it worth saying something." He looked at her. What do you mean? She was quiet for a moment, not gathering words exactly. More like deciding how many of them to use. Nora had always been careful with words in a way Rayan was only beginning to understand was a choice, not a trait. If you had said it to be mean, she said, I would have just ignored it. People say mean things all the time. That's nothing new. She looked at him steadily. But you said it like a compliment. You said it like the highest thing you could see in me was how well I would serve someone else's life, and you didn't even realize you were doing it. Rayan sat with that. That's harder to ignore, she said, not because it hurt more, because it told me something true about how you actually see people. The break room was quiet. Someone had left a mug on the counter that was still steaming. Through the glass partition, he could see the office filling up slowly, people arriving with bags and jackets and takeaway cups, the ordinary beginning of an ordinary Tuesday. I don't think I see people that way, he said, then heard himself say it, then wondered if that was the kind of sentence a man said when he did not see people that way or when he did. You probably don't think you do, Nora said, not unkindly, just plainly. How do I fix it? She tilted her head slightly. Fix what? How I see people, how I see, he gestured vaguely. Women, you. She almost smiled, not quite. That's not something I can give you instructions for. I'm not asking for instructions, I'm asking where I start. Something changed in her expression then, not warmer exactly, more open. Like a door that had been mostly closed, moving an inch or two toward unlocked. Start by noticing, she said. That's it, you don't have to change everything at once, you just have to start noticing what you haven't been noticing. Like what? Like who cleans up without being asked, who remembers things without a calendar, who absorbs the discomfort in a room so other people don't have to feel it, who is always making things easier for everyone around them and getting called sweet for it instead of capable. She paused, notice that, and then ask yourself what it costs them. Rayan was quiet. That's it, he said. That's plenty, she said, for a start. He nodded, looked at the table, looked back at her. Can I ask something else? You can ask. Does it bother you? When people say things like that to you, the wife joke that she's so helpful, all of it, does it actually bother you or do you just, he tried to find the word, move past it? She was quiet for longer this time. It used to bother me in a way that made me feel like the problem was me, she said, like I was being too sensitive, like people didn't mean anything by it so I shouldn't feel anything by it. She straightened slightly. It took me a while to understand that you can know someone didn't mean to step on you and still feel the weight of their foot. He looked at her. She said, I stopped being angry about it, not because it stopped mattering, because I realized anger at every individual thing was going to exhaust me before the world ran out of individual things. So I choose when to say something and when to let it go. She met his eyes. I said something to you. Why me? She considered the question, because you're not cruel, and not cruel people are the only ones worth spending the effort on. He felt something land in his chest that he did not have a name for, not guilt exactly, not shame, something more like waking up in a room you have been sleeping in for years and seeing it clearly for the first time, the same furniture, the same walls, but the light different, everything you had not looked at now visible. He had lived inside a version of himself that he had always believed was good enough, friendly, kind, not a bad person, and those things were true, he was not a bad person. But not bad and good were not the same country. There was a lot of distance between them. He was just beginning to understand how much. He and Claire had dinner that evening at the Thai place they liked. She was tired from a long day. She kicked off her shoes under the table and told him about a meeting that had run 90 minutes over and left her feeling like she had been slowly pressed flat by something enormous and patient. He listened. He actually listened, not the kind of listening where you are waiting for your turn, but the kind where you follow the shape of what someone is saying. When she finished, she looked at him. Sorry, I'm just venting. Don't apologize, he said. I wanted to hear it. She tilted her head slightly. You okay? Yeah, he said. I've just been thinking. About what? He was quiet for a moment. About whether I'm as good at paying attention as I think I am. Claire looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face in a while, curious, actually curious, like something in him had shifted enough that she could feel it across a table. What brought that on, she said. Something someone said at work. Good something or bad something? He thought about it, necessary something. She nodded slowly. She reached across the table and picked up her water glass and looked at him over the rim of it with those gray eyes that he had once, in the early months, not been able to look away from. He had gotten comfortable. He had stopped looking. He looked now. She said, "You want to talk about it?" And the old Rayan would have said, "No, it's nothing, don't worry about it." Would have rooted around the feeling, because feelings were things you handled privately and then put away and did not bring to dinner. He said, "Yeah, I think I do." And they talked. Not about anything fixed or solved. Nothing got resolved over pad thai on a Tuesday, but they talked in a way they had not talked in a long time, the kind of talking where both people are actually in the room, where no one is waiting for the conversation to be over so they can go back to whatever they were doing before. He drove home thinking about what Nora had said, "Notice what you haven't been noticing." He had been not noticing for a long time. He could see that now. He had been moving through his life with the comfortable confidence of a man who had never been told that confidence is not the same as awareness. One sentence from a woman in a break room. 8 words. And the whole architecture of what he thought he understood was making a sound he had never heard it make before. Not breaking, not collapsing, just settling the way old houses settle into something closer to true. He parked outside his building and sat in the car for a moment. He thought about his mother, about Claire, about every woman he had called capable and meant it as a compliment while never once asking what the capability cost her. He thought about how easy it was to appreciate someone's usefulness without ever seeing their weight. He had been doing that his entire life. Not cruelly, not deliberately, just automatically, the way you walk a familiar route without ever choosing it. He got out of the car. He went inside. Claire was already in bed with a book. He sat on his side and did not immediately reach for his phone the way he usually did. She looked up from her book. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm here, though," he said. She smiled just slightly. "Yeah," she said, "you are." He lay back, stared at the ceiling. He was here, he was actually here, and he was beginning to understand that those were two very different things from just being present in a room. The next morning, he arrived at the office early, not to go to the break room, not to look for Nora. Just because something in him had decided that showing up earlier was a small way of showing up more. He made his coffee, sat at his desk, opened his email. He read the first line, then the second, then the third. He kept reading. At 9, Nora walked past his row with a stack of folders and he did not say anything. She did not look his way. But for the first time in the 2 years they had worked near each other, he watched her walk past and thought, "She's a whole person with a whole life and I know almost none of it." He had been treating the edges of her like the whole picture for over a year. He pulled up a blank document on his screen, typed nothing, stared at it. Then he typed, "What do I actually know about the people I work with?" He sat with the question. The list was shorter than he expected. He closed the documents, leaned back. Outside the glass, the city was moving in all directions at once, 1,000 different people carrying 1,000 different weights, none of them slowing down to explain themselves to anyone. He had spent 28 years moving through all of that the same way they were moving, forward, efficiently, unaware of most of what was happening beside him. It was time to move differently. He did not know yet what that looked like. He just knew it had to start somewhere, and somewhere had already started. It had started in a break room at 7:50 in the morning with 8 words he was not ready to hear. He was ready now. The conversation that changed Rayan was not dramatic. That was the first thing he had to get used to. He had expected somewhere in the back of his mind that growth would arrive with some kind of signal, a clear moment, a speech, something that felt like a turning point while it was happening. Instead, it arrived the way most real things arrive, quietly in small pieces spread across ordinary days that looked from the outside like nothing in particular. It was a Thursday, 3 weeks after the break room conversation, when he finally understood that he had been waiting for the wrong kind of moment. He was sitting in the conference room for a campaign review, the kind of meeting that runs 40 minutes longer than it should because nobody wants to be the one to say the hard thing out loud. There were 8 people in the room. Nora was one of them. She sat 2 seats down from him with a notepad and a pen, and she had been the only person for the past 20 minutes who had been tracking the actual problem. The campaign had a gap, a real one. The timeline was built on a deadline that had been moved 2 weeks earlier without the project coordinator being told, which meant everything downstream was wrong. The presentation the team was about to send to the client was built on a foundation that no longer existed. 3 people had spoken in the last 20 minutes. They had talked around the problem with varying degrees of polish. The project director, a man named Daniel who was good at sounding decisive, had said the word solutions twice without offering one. Nora had said nothing yet. Rayan watched her. She had the answer, he could see it. She had been writing things down and calculating silently while everyone else performed confidence in front of each other. Daniel looked around the room. Does anyone have a thought on the revised approach? Silence. Rayan looked at Nora. She hesitated, the kind of hesitation that did not come from not knowing, but from having been in rooms like this before and knowing how the math usually worked out for women who spoke before they were invited. Rayan said, Nora, you've been writing. What are you seeing? 8 faces turned toward her. She looked at him for one brief second. Something passed across her expression too quickly for him to name. Then she picked up her notepad and she laid out the problem in 4 sentences, clear and clean and exactly right. Then she laid out 2 options for fixing it, with the trade-offs of each, and sat back. Daniel said, yes, that's it. Let's go with option 2. The meeting moved forward. Afterward, in the hallway, Nora walked beside him toward the elevator. Thank you, she said, quietly, not making a performance of it. You had the answer, he said. I just asked the question. She pressed the elevator button. You'd be surprised how rarely that happens. He would not have been surprised 2 months ago. He would not even have noticed. He would have sat in that meeting and watched a room full of people talk around a problem without ever thinking about who else might be holding the solution. He noticed now. That was what she had told him to do, and it turned out noticing was not a passive thing. It had weight, it had responsibility, because once you saw something clearly, you could not unsee it, and that meant you had to decide what to do with the seeing. He had been deciding in small ways every day. He started asking questions he had not asked before, not in a way that felt calculated or performed, just the ordinary way of paying attention. He asked Claire what she actually wanted for dinner, instead of waiting for her to agree with whatever he suggested. He called his mother and asked how she was before she could ask about him. He asked Pete one afternoon what he was working on, and actually listened to the answer, and Pete looked so genuinely surprised by the sustained attention that Rayan felt a brief and specific sadness. These were small things, he knew that. He was not under any illusion that he had become a different person by asking better questions. But small things done consistently are how the shape of a life changes, not in an event, in accumulation. He and Nora did not have another long conversation for a while after the break room. They were friendly at work in the way colleagues are friendly, nodding in hallways, brief exchanges near the printer, the ordinary texture of people who share a space without sharing much else. But something had shifted in the quality of it. He was not sure she noticed. He noticed. He noticed that she always had a book in her bag, always the same kind, quiet and dense, the kind of books that reward patience. He noticed that she had a dry sense of humor that only came out in small doses, like she was rationing it carefully. He noticed that she always said thank you when someone held a door, but not in the automatic way most people did, like she actually meant it each time, like she had decided at some point that gratitude was worth being genuine about. He noticed that she was careful about what she shared and generous about what she gave, and that those 2 things operating together meant most people knew how helpful she was without knowing anything about who she was. That was what she had been trying to tell him in the break room, he realized, not just about herself, about a whole pattern that played out in rooms like theirs every single day. He saw it now everywhere he looked. The woman in his gym who wiped down every machine and never got thanked. The receptionist at his dentist's office who remembered every patient's name and every preference and was described by the dentist as a great asset, with the inflection of someone complimenting a well-organized filing cabinet. His colleague Laura, who organized every group dinner and was praised for being so good at this, as though it were a lovely natural quality and not a decision she made every time. And alongside every one of those women, men who received credit for showing up. He had been one of those men. He had not been cruel about it. He had just been comfortable. One evening he called his sister, who was 32 and lived 2 cities away and whom he talked to 3 or 4 times a year. Her name was Priya. They had a good relationship in the warm and distant way siblings can have good relationships without really knowing each other. "This is unexpected," she said when she picked up. "It's not your birthday." "I know," he said. "I just wanted to talk." A pause. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, I've just been thinking about some things. Can I ask you something?" "Okay." "Do you ever feel like," he stopped, found the words, "like people see what you can do for them before they see you?" A long silence. "Why are you asking me that?" she said. "Because I think I might have been doing it, not just to strangers, to you, to Mum, to people I actually care about." Another silence, longer this time. "Rayan," she said, her voice had a texture in it he had not heard before. "Where is this coming from?" "Someone said something to me," he said, "and I couldn't stop thinking about it." "What did they say?" He told her the story, the break room, the joke, the 8 words, the conversation after, all of it. When he finished, Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been waiting 12 years for you to have this conversation." He did not know what to say to that. "Not with me specifically," she said. "Just, in general, I've been waiting for you to look at this." "That long?" "You were never mean," she said. "You were never one of those men who was mean about it, but you always had this comfort, like the world was arranged correctly and you were just living in it." She paused, and some of how it was arranged was on the backs of people who didn't get asked whether they minded. He sat with that for a long time after they hung up. The world arranged correctly. He had lived in an arranged world without asking who did the arranging, without asking what it cost to keep everything neat and running and in place. He had benefited from that arrangement every day without seeing it as an arrangement at all, just as the way things were. He went to bed that night and lay in the dark, and thought about what it meant to go through a life taking things as given that someone else had spent their energy giving. He thought about his mother's hands, how they were always moving, how they were never empty. He thought about Claire asking if he was okay tonight. She always asked first. He had answered first for years without noticing the order. He was going to start asking first. That was a small thing, but small things done honestly accumulate. 3 days later, he ran into Nora in the lobby of the building, waiting for the elevator, just the two of them, coats and morning cold still in the air between them. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. The elevator opened, they stepped in. He stood there for a moment and then said, without engineering it, "I called my sister last week, first time in months. We talked for an hour." She looked at him. "How was it?" "Honest," he said. "Strange, good." The elevator reached their floor, the doors opened. She stepped out and looked back at him briefly. "That's the best combination," she said. He held the door. "Yeah," he said, "it is." He walked to his desk. He sat down. He opened his email and read every line of the first message without looking away once. He was learning to stay in rooms, to stay in conversations, to stay in the uncomfortable truth of a thing without reaching immediately for the nearest comfortable exit. He was not finished learning, he was nowhere close. But he had started. And starting, it turned out, was the part that had always been the hardest. The month after Rayan began paying attention differently was the month everything around him began to look different too. He had not expected that. He had expected maybe to feel better about himself, a quiet improvement, the moral satisfaction of a man who has recognized something and course-corrected, clean and manageable. What happened instead was messier than that. He was sitting with Claire on a Sunday morning. She was reading the paper. He was drinking coffee. The apartment was warm and the morning was slow, the kind of slow Sunday that looks like contentment from any angle. And he was watching her read, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear without thinking, the way her eyes moved across the page with that small, focused attention she gave to everything she cared about. He realized he had spent 2 years sitting across from this woman and never once asked her what she wanted the next 5 years to look like. He had assumed because she had never said otherwise, and she had never said otherwise because somewhere along the way she had learned not to lead with it, and somewhere along the way he had learned not to ask. They had built a shared life on a foundation of two people who were comfortable and good together, and who had never had the conversation about what they were actually building toward. He put his coffee down. "Claire," he said. She looked up from the paper. "What do you want?" he said. "Not for breakfast, in general. What do you actually want for your life, for us, for the next few years?" She stared at him. "Where did that come from?" she said. "I've been thinking," he said, "a lot lately, and I realized I've never asked you that, not properly, not as a real question that I wanted a real answer to." She set the paper down slowly. She looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her before, like she was trying to decide if this was a real conversation or a conversation-shaped thing that would collapse if she leaned on it. "You actually want to know," she said. "Yes," he said, "I actually want to know." She picked up her coffee cup, held it with both hands. And then she started talking. She talked for 40 minutes. He did not interrupt once. She told him things he did not know, that she had been offered a position at another firm 8 months ago and had turned it down without telling him because she had not wanted to disrupt what they had, that she had been thinking about going back to school for something she had put aside years ago, that she wanted to travel, not the kind of travel they had done together, weekends in nearby cities, but real travel, months of it, that kind of knowing a place. That she had been feeling lately, like she was living in a version of her life that was mostly correct but not quite hers. She said that last part quietly, with her eyes on her coffee cup. He let it sit. Then he said, "Why didn't you tell me about the job?" She looked at him. "Because you were settled, and I didn't want to be the thing that unsettled you." He heard it, the whole shape of it, 2 years of her making herself smaller so he could stay comfortable. Not because he had asked her to, because she had learned somewhere before him that this was what you did. And he had accepted the smaller version of her without noticing it was smaller, without asking why she took up exactly the amount of space she did and never more. He said, "I don't want you to make decisions around my comfort. I want to know what you actually want." She was quiet for a long time. "That's new," she said. "I know," he said. "What happened to you?" He almost said nothing. Then he said, "Someone told me I couldn't see the difference between two words, and I've been trying to learn what the difference is ever since." She looked at him for a moment. "What two words?" "Wife," he said, "and woman." She was still for a moment. Then something in her face shifted, not dramatically, just the way a face shifts when something true has entered the room. They sat there in the quiet apartment on a slow Sunday morning and talked in a way they had not talked, honestly, since the early weeks when everything was still being discovered. And it was harder than those early weeks because now there were real things at stake, real choices, real differences in what they wanted that they had been able to ignore because no one had named them yet. They did not fix everything that morning. Some of what they talked about did not have an easy shape. The job she had turned down was gone. The months of travel she wanted were not something he had ever thought about wanting. They were two people who loved each other and who had also, it turned out, been assuming each other's contentment without checking. Naming that was not comfortable. But it was necessary. He walked to the kitchen and made more coffee and stood at the window looking out at the street. It had started raining, the soft, steady kind that turns the city gray and quiet. He watched it for a moment. Nora had said, "Notice what you haven't been noticing." He had been noticing, and every time he looked at something clearly, it asked him to look at something else. It was not a comfortable process. It was not supposed to be. At work the following week, he and Nora ended up at the same lunch table by accident, both arriving at the small corner area with their respective lunches at the same moment. She had her blue container. He had a sandwich he had made at home, which was new. They sat. For a few minutes, neither of them said much. It was not awkward, it was just quiet. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "You keep asking if you can ask," she said. "You can just ask." "Fair." He looked at his sandwich. "Did you know what would happen when you said that to me, the 8 words?" She thought about it. "I knew it would land somewhere," she said. "I didn't know where." "Were you worried I'd be offended?" "A little," she said. "But not worried enough to not say it." "Why not?" She opened her lunch container. "Because offended and changed can look the same at the beginning," she said. "I couldn't tell which one you'd be, but I figured the sentence was true either way, so it was worth saying." He nodded, and now, which one do you think I am? She looked at him, not evaluating, just looking, the way she looked at things she was genuinely trying to see clearly. I think you're trying, she said. I think trying is the most honest thing a person can be. That's a low bar, he said. It's a less common bar than you'd think. He ate his sandwich, she ate her lunch. The office moved around them. After a while he said, I had a real conversation with Claire, a long one. How did it go? Hard, he said. Good, she told me things she'd been carrying around for months. What did you do with that? I listened, he said. I didn't try to fix it, I just listened. Nora was quiet for a moment. That's not nothing, she said. It felt small. Small is how it starts, she said. If it was easy, it would have happened already. He thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. Small is how it starts. He had been waiting for the moment to feel big enough to prove something, to himself mostly, the moment where he could point and say, there, that is when I changed. But change did not seem to work that way. It seemed to work the way a river reshapes a bank, not in a single flood, but in constant small movement that you only see when you step back and look at the shape of things. He was not a finished project, he knew that. He was a man who had heard something true and decided to sit with the discomfort of it instead of walking away. That was all, that was the whole thing. At the end of the day, he packed up his bag and walked to the elevator. Nora was in the lobby when he got there, pulling on her coat, her bag over one shoulder and her blue lunch container tucked under her arm. He held the door open. Thank you, she said, the way she always said it, like she meant it. Of course, he said. They walked out into the rain together, two people going in different directions, and split off at the corner without ceremony. He walked to his car. She walked toward the bus stop. He drove home thinking about all the doors he had walked through without holding them. All the rooms he had entered without checking who was still outside. He was learning to check. Claire was cooking when he got home, something with tomatoes and herbs that smelled like warmth. She turned when he came in. How was your day? She said. Good, he said, I think. He set his bag down and came into the kitchen and asked if he could help. She handed him a spoon. He stood beside her and stirred something and did not think about anything else. Just the pot, just the smell of it, just her shoulder an inch from his. Just this. He was learning that this was enough, that this, paid attention to, was actually everything. And he had been missing it for years while looking for something larger. The world does not change in grand gestures. It changes in a man learning to hold a door, in a woman deciding her sentence is worth saying, in a conversation on a Sunday morning that no one else will ever know about between two people who chose honesty over comfort. In 8 words. In the difference between 2 words that look almost the same and mean entirely different things. He stirred the pot. He was home. He was actually finally here. 6 months after a joke he made without thinking, Rayan stood in the break room at 7:50 in the morning and did not say anything clever. He made his coffee. He looked out the small window above the sink. The city was doing its morning thing, gray and purposeful, everyone going somewhere they had agreed to be. Nora came in at 7:53, set her bag on the counter. Reached for the coffee machine. Morning, he said. Morning, she said. That was it, that was the whole exchange. No joke, no performance, no grin at the doorframe like a man who had decided he was charming. Just 2 people making coffee on a Tuesday, which was not a story worth telling, except that it was, because the ordinary quality of it was exactly the point, because the ordinary quality of it was what he had earned. The months between that first conversation and this Tuesday morning had not been a straight line. He had not moved from unaware man to enlightened person in any clean or satisfying arc. Real change does not work like that. It backtracks, it gets confused. It has weeks where old habits come back with the comfortable familiarity of a coat you should have donated years ago. He had still interrupted people in meetings. Not always, not as often, but it still happened, and now when it happened he caught it, and the catching was different from the not noticing. Catching it meant doing something about it. It meant saying, actually I interrupted you, finish what you were saying, which was awkward and worth it. He had still defaulted to assuming Claire was fine when the easier assumption was available. But now when he defaulted, she said something, because he had asked her to, because they had agreed that comfort built on silence was not actually comfort, and he was learning to hear her corrections without getting defensive. Not without discomfort, just without the defensive wall that had always been his first response to being told he had missed something. He and Claire had not arrived at any final decisions. The conversation about her wanting to go back to school was ongoing. The conversation about what their life together was building toward was ongoing. These things were not problems to be solved in one sitting. They were commitments to keep returning to. He had also started returning to Priya more often, bi-weekly calls, nothing dramatic, just actual contact, learning his sister the way you learn someone you love, slowly and without pretense. She had a dry wit that matched his, which he had never noticed because he had not spent enough time listening to find it. His mother noticed the change before anyone else did. Mothers usually do. On one of the Sunday calls, before he could ask how she was, she said, "Something is different about you." "In a good way," he said. A pause. "Yes," she said, "good." He asked what was different. "You sound," she said slowly, "like you're actually here." He did not tell her about Nora, or the break room, or the 8 words. Some stories belong to the people they happened to, not to the people who were changed by them. But he thought about what she said for a long time. He sounds like he's actually here. He had been somewhere else for a long time, not physically elsewhere. But the particular kind of absent that happens when a person is so comfortable in their version of the world that they never really arrive in anyone else's. He had been arriving. At work, things with Nora had settled into something he did not have a tidy word for. Friendship was close but not quite right. Friendship implied a mutuality of investment, shared history, the casual intimacy of people who had chosen each other. They had not exactly chosen each other. They had just landed in each other's path at the right moment, and something honest had been exchanged, and they had both moved forward. He had started asking questions, not about her in the way he used to collect surface details about people as social currency, but genuine questions, about the books in her bag. About the project she had been wrestling with for 3 weeks. About what she had wanted to do before she ended up in project coordination. That question, the last one, she had answered on a rainy afternoon when they were both waiting for a client call to start, and the conference room was empty and time was slow. "Architecture," she said. He looked at her, "Really?" "I was halfway through a degree. Then my father got sick and I came home and things shifted and I ended up here." "Do you regret it?" She considered. "I don't think regret is the right word. It's more like I'm still in a conversation with what I gave up. The conversation hasn't finished yet." "What do you mean?" "I mean I haven't decided if I'm done with it, or if it's done with me." He sat with that. Then he said, "Is there a version where you go back?" "Maybe," she said, "I don't know yet." "What would it take?" She looked at him. "Courage," she said, "and probably a very forgiving savings account." He almost smiled. She almost did too. The client call started and they moved into their professional selves and the conversation ended there. But he thought about it, about the architecture degree sitting half-finished in a room of her past, not abandoned, still in conversation, about the way she had described it not as a loss but as something unresolved, alive. He thought about all the things people carried that he had never thought to ask about. He had started asking. On the last Friday of that month, the team had a small end-of-quarter gathering in the office. Someone had ordered food, someone had organized a playlist, the kind of informal work event that lasts 90 minutes and feels simultaneously too long and almost pleasant. Rayan stood with Pete and a woman from accounts named Helen, and they talked about the quarter and the upcoming projects and all the ordinary stuff of working life. At one point, Helen mentioned offhandedly that she had just bought a flat, her first one, and Pete said, "Great, well done," and moved on. Rayan said, "That's a big deal. How does it feel?" Helen looked at him. "Terrifying," she said, then after a pause, "and really good." "Both at once," he said. "Both at once," she agreed. And something in her face opened up a little. The way people's faces open when they feel actually seen, even briefly, even in the middle of a work party over mediocre food on a Friday afternoon. He was not performing it. That was the difference now. Earlier in his life, he might have asked the same question as a social maneuver, a way of seeming warm. Now he asked because he actually wanted to know, because he had learned that the interior of other people's experiences was worth asking about and worth hearing. That was the thing Nora had changed. Not his behavior exactly, his attention. She had made him look at where his attention was going and ask whether it was going to the right places, and once he had looked, he could not look away. Toward the end of the gathering, Nora was across the room talking to someone from design, and she glanced over and caught his eye for a moment. A brief look, unloaded, just two people acknowledging each other across a room. He raised his coffee cup slightly. She nodded once. That was the whole thing. Later, when people were gathering their things and the food was running out and the playlist had wound down to something slow, Rayan found himself standing near the window with his coat over his arm. He thought about the man who had stood in the doorway 8 months ago with a grin and a line that cost him nothing. He thought about how certain that man had been of his own goodness, and how that certainty had been not dishonest but incomplete. He had been good the way a person is good when they have never been tested, when they have never been asked to look at the uncomfortable thing and stay. He had been asked. He had stayed. He was not done staying. He would not be done for a long time, maybe ever, because the work of seeing people clearly, of asking what their capability costs them, of holding doors in every sense of the phrase, was not a project with a finished date. It was a practice, a daily one. He put on his coat. He walked to the elevator and pressed the button and waited. The doors opened. He stepped in and pressed the button for the lobby and rode down in silence. Out on the street, the air was cold and clear. He pulled up his collar, started walking. He thought about Claire and what she had said she wanted, and how they were, slowly and imperfectly, trying to build toward it together. He thought about Priya and the bi-weekly calls that had started to feel like knowing someone rather than maintaining contact. He thought about his mother's hands, always moving, and how he had called her last week just to say he loved her, without a reason, without a preamble, just those words on a Wednesday afternoon. He thought about Nora. Not with longing, that was not what this story was. He thought about her the way you think about someone who changed the angle you stand at when you look at things. Someone who handed you a different lens without being asked and then walked away and got on with their own life, which was full and complex and only partially visible to him because it was hers. He had learned to see people as full, complex, and only partially visible. That was the gift. Not romantic, not dramatic, but permanent in the way that true things become permanent once you have seen them. You cannot unsee them. You cannot go back to the version of yourself that did not know. He turned the corner. The city went on around him. He went on with it. He was not the man from the doorway. He was not yet the man he was still becoming. He was somewhere in between, which is where all real change actually lives, in the honest middle, in the ongoing, in the practice of a thing you will spend the rest of your life getting better at. One joke, 8 words. A conversation over break room coffee that lasted 20 minutes and cost both of them something. Not a great love story, not a redemption arc. Just a man who learned to notice. Just a woman who decided her sentence was worth saying. Just the ordinary, permanent, everything-changing consequence of two people being honest with each other in a small room on an ordinary morning. Which turns out to be how most real things begin. Not with a grand moment. With a word, with a look, with 8 quiet words that found the exact place they needed to land. And then the slow, necessary, quietly extraordinary work of what comes after.